Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello, Ms. Pluta.
YouTube has started.
Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4 o'clock, time to begin our joint strategic meeting with the planning board. At this time, I'll call the roll and for the council members and Ms. Anthony,
Here.
Councilman Gordon,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway,
Here.
Councilman James,
Here.
Councilman McGee,
Here.
Councilman Kazire. All right, this time we do have a quorum and I'll call ourselves to order.
And this is Mary Ann Raspberry. I'm calling the roll of the planning department, of the planning board. Richard Yurchek. Don't forget to unmute. Richard, I see you.
Did you call me or your check?
Richard Yurchek, but he's got it on mute. Okay, Edith Covington. Rich Ali.
Here.
Richard, here, okay, good. Renee Hardis. Jennifer Smith. Patrick Furr. Margaret Desio. Here. And that's us. And we do not have a quorum, I do not believe. But I call, yes,
I was muted. I'm sorry. I'm here.
there you are, Renee. Thank you, Renee. And I see Jennifer's here too. Anybody else? I see Richard's here, but we haven't heard from him. So, but I call the meeting to order.
I believe we turn it over to Lisa.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Stywinter, the Director of Planning and Development with the City of Monroe. I want to welcome everyone to the Joint Planning Board and City Council Strategic Planning Meeting. And I want to thank all of you for taking your time out of this beautiful day to join us. I do appreciate that. So today's meeting is designed to be an informal, interactive workshop, but it also serves as a regular electronic meeting for City Council and Planning Board. So the electronic meeting rules will apply for the meeting. And since this is an electronic meeting, I'll ask that anyone wishing to speak during the meeting, please do so, but just state your name for the record before you speak, and we would appreciate that. Each of you should have received a PowerPoint presentation in your agenda packet. So hopefully you have that with you for your meeting today. Before we get started, I just want to introduce our consultants that are participating in today's meeting. We have Kelly Klepper and James Ehrman with Kimley Horn and Associates, a planning and engineering firm. They have been assisting the planning department with the rewrite of our Unified Development Ordinance and our zoning map update. We also have Bob Hagman and Nick Tosco with Porter Sproul, a law firm that has also been assisting our department with performing legal review of our Unified Development Ordinance. And I appreciate all of you being here with us today. As previously mentioned, planning staff has been working with Kimley Horn and Associates on a project called Transform Monroe, which is the rewrite of our Unified Development Ordinance and update to our zoning map. Transform Monroe is the city's Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO, and is a consolidated document that contains all of the city's land use and development requirements. Transform Monroe is the planning department's tool that serves to implement the vision for growth and development that was identified in the City of Monroe's land use plan called Forward Monroe that we updated in 2018. To date, Kimley Horn and Associates and the City of Monroe planning staff have facilitated 3 joint planning board and city council workshops. One was held in June 2019, one in September 2019, and then February 2020. Just wanted to provide that brief update since it has been almost a year due to COVID that we haven't been able to have a workshop. But topics that we did discuss at the previous workshop, just for review, included the Unified Development Ordinance existing code analysis, the proposed definitions and standards in the new ordinance. We introduced the parking and signage requirements at one of the workshops, We also went into depth about the proposed traditional and mixed use districts, the development standards for those districts. We've talked about the non-residential design standards, allowable uses, and the development standards, as I mentioned before. But the purpose of today's workshop is to provide a general status update of where we are now in the rewrite of the ordinance, initiate the public review aspect of the project on those ordinance sections that we have drafted, reviewed, and completed to date. And we want to kick off the update to the zoning map, which will be our next big step in this process. So specific draft ordinance sections that will be discussed today includes residential design standards, landscaping, buffering, fences and walls, subdivisions, and open space requirements. I'd like to now turn it over to Kelly Klepper with Kimley Horn Associates to kick off our presentation for today.
Thank you, Lisa. And for the record, this is Kelly Klepper with Kimley Horn. It's always great to be with you all, although I wish I was actually sitting there with you versus virtually, but we'll get through this together and we'll be back in front of each other face to face in short order, right, Mayor?
Yes, sir.
So what we're going to do is kind of walk through a presentation. And as Lisa has reminded me, we have approximately 2 hours to go through some of the information. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we've had a phenomenal working relationship with Lisa, Doug, and Carrie. Definitely appreciate the insight and the input from the outside counsel. They've been providing some very good direction and clarification on items. So we want to say thank you to them. I know they're on the call today. So with that, Lisa, with your permission, I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. And also just a quick reminder that if you've got any questions or anything, please let us know as we're going. It'd be a lot easier, especially in this format, to kind of talk about something as we're dealing with it with something on the screen versus trying to go backwards in time, so to speak. And I apologize, you're going to keep seeing my profile because of I've got my 3 screens working over here. So we'll try to do. So as Lisa said, we've got a general status update. We want to walk through non-residential design standards, residential, some optional, which are definitely optional design standards, landscape and buffering, and working all the way through. And there again, you'll see the questions and answers at the end of that, but there again, we want to make sure that we are providing those opportunities throughout the discussion to have that. So we've actually talked about this a couple of different times with, the existing layout is the screen or the image that's on the left. The current code is actually identified as Chapter 156, and it has approximately 17 components to it. Going through the process that we've been going through working with staff is we've consolidated, reimagined, I'll call it, portions of it, and put things where we think it's probably easier to follow from a logistical standpoint, as well as just an overall review. And Mayor, I apologize. I'm trying not to lose my voice, but I'd already forewarned Lisa that that may be a case. So if it gets a little scratchy or difficult to hear, please let me know, and I will try to do my best to clarify that.
Okay.
So you can see on the right-hand side, those are the updated outline components. It's actually going into Chapter 157, is being labeled and identified as the Unified Development Ordinance. There's also provisions in the UDOs we've been going through with specific references to 160D. And of course, that's the North Carolina General Statutes section that consolidated portions of the state planning laws into 160D. And there's certain provisions and certain things that the city has to take care of and address in a certain manner, in a certain way, and as more importantly, in a certain time frame. So we've been doing those cross checks as it relates to 160D and the information available to the teams to make sure we're being consistent with that. So from this perspective, hopefully we are looking at that. What you'll see is the status of each of the sections, each of those 11 sections, and there is anything that says complete are basically things that we've provided to staff. Staff has reviewed, we've worked through those, provided to the legal team, gotten those comments back, and discussed, revised, and anything needed to be resolved is resolved. In review is some portion of either with the legal team as we speak or post-legal revisions. So in essence, they've seen basically every component that we've provided as part of the UDO. And there again, I'm not going to shortchange their efforts. They've been very instrumental and very much an integral part to this process. So let's talk about design standards. And James, I'm going to have you talk through this, the components, and you're just going to tell me when to advance the screen for you, okay?
Great, thanks, Kelly. And for the record, this is James Zerman of Kinley Horn and Associates. So as one of the big components of the new code, we really wanted to provide some additional non-residential design standards. Now, these are kind of different standards that will qualify throughout the city and really are going to aim in on providing some much more aesthetically pleasing buildings, ensuring we're providing that contextual visual style that we all find really appealing for great places that we can think of, right? When we're walking down a street and we see great buildings, everyone has a kind of picture in their mind of what those are going to look like. There's some great ways that we can do this to achieve this in the code that provide some level of flexibility and some level of creativity, because naturally we don't want to prohibit some good design, but we want to really encourage it and provide a menu of options to really get those buildings to pop and really have visually interesting and appealing aesthetical structures there, right? So some of those things and some of the ways we do that are having requirements for things such as color, overall design and building materials, and also what we prohibit building material wise as well. On the screen, you'll see a couple of different examples of how we visually demonstrate these different architectural techniques, things like transparency of floors, which will be the amount of windows or doorways within the actual facade of the structures, and also about what kind of different architectural features we're seeing. Cornices, are we seeing different projections, different recessions in the walls? Those are all really different ways that we can make sure that buildings are going to be A, interesting to look at, and B, really are going to add to the character of the city and really add to that visual appeal that we're looking for when you think of great places. Kelly, I think you can go ahead and get to the next slide there, unless there's any questions on that. And a lot of these are some architectural terms that may be a little complicated, but they're really trying to get through some basic concepts here, right? We want to address things such as vertical mass, roof lines, wall offsets, and a lot of these different purposes for these techniques is we want to try to limit those things like blank walls, right? If you're thinking about walking down a street or walking down a really pleasing environment, one of the big detractors of that could be big monotonous blank walls that we look at and say, man, I wish they would have done something more interesting with that building or with that structure. And so by providing these options and these requirements, basically what we do is say, here's a list of the different things that we're going to categorize as a possibility for the design. You have to choose a few of these out of this list, and they have to come together in a way that's really going to make a building that we want to see within the city. And so whether that's looking at how things are divided between the different stories, as you can see on the screen there, between the ground floor and the upper floors, those are all different techniques that we can use and codify throughout the code to get there.
Question.
Yes.
It's considered a commercial design standard.
It would be a commercial design standard. It really applies to any sort of non-residential building. And what we'll also see as we go through this, we'll have some particular standards for industrial buildings, because those are a little different than some of the commercial or non-residential. And Kelly's actually going to jump in a little bit further into some of the optional residential standards that we have too. But I'm going to let him go further into that.
For the record, that was
Yeah,
Councilmember
identify
Saluda
myself.
Anthony, just so that
Salute
it's clear for the
Anthony
record.
with the question. I've corrected that. That was Salute Anthony with the question.
Thank you.
Ready, James?
Great, Kelly. I think we'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
And these are some more graphical representations of what we're really getting at there. And previously I spoke to that blank wall area, and these are just some of the examples of some of those different monotonous walls that we want to really limit in the structure and design of these buildings, and really require transparency as well. Naturally, where there's more doors and windows on the ground floor, we really want to hone in on those as being the most interesting parts of the building to look at from a pedestrian point of view. And then we do lower those requirements as we move up through the stories of the buildings themselves. And that's pretty common best practice throughout what we see and what we've seen and used in the past for great success for some of these designs of buildings. And the blank walls, you'll also notice that we do have things such as windows, awnings, features, any of the cornices or columns that you might see. These are all different types of kind of those really accepted standards of great buildings that we think of when we go through these. And so that's more examples of some of the code graphics that we've instituted throughout the UDO at this point. Another really exciting part of the code that we've been working on that we think is pretty cool overall is really introducing this concept of out parcel buildings or quote unquote liner buildings. Now, if you think about these are some of the maybe larger style developments that you might see. Maybe it's an anchor store in the back. Maybe it's a grocery store, a big box retailer store in the back. And when you really think about how those look when you drive by them, maybe they're just a big parking lot in the front. Maybe they have some buffering. Maybe that's kind of a nice thing to have a little bit of buffering. But we wanted to allow the concept and the development of some of those out parcel buildings that really hug the street and create a much more inviting type of pedestrian access point and provide those buildings along the pathways so you can easily walk, get in and out of these developments, and really institute some standards within the parking lots themselves as well that provide pedestrian pathways through some of those islands, some of those terminals, really just trying to create a more inviting big box or larger retail environment for some of these uses that you see throughout the city. And so as you see on your screen, really we're trying to encourage cluster of those out parcel liner buildings along the street, require those pedestrian connectivity options, and really try to emphasize consistent building themes. So these buildings look like they belong together, they fit together, and they kind of look like a complete package. And as I alluded to before, industrial design standards is another thing that we've looked at here in the updated UDO. This is definitely something that we see a lot of communities, have questions about. They go, James, Kelly, what can we do to really make some of these warehouses, some of these fulfillment centers, things like that we're seeing more and more of now, actually, when you think about it, how in the past year or so, we've seen a lot of increased demand for a lot of these warehouses and fulfillment center type uses. And we want to make sure that we address those as they come online more and more throughout the city, right? So we want to make sure that we have some level of facade improvements required. We want to limit those blank walls. We really want to go ahead and say that we would like some foundation plantings required throughout those developments. And also we went into detail of how to handle things like parking, unloading areas, equipment areas, making sure that those things are screened appropriately, making sure that we're going to have developments that a business park or maybe a new business from out of town, when they go to the city, they can say, oh, great, this is really going to be a nice business park. We're going to locate here. We're going to invest here, and providing some of those baseline standards visually for moving forward for the next portion of the city's history here.
Before we leave and this is Kelly Klepper again, before we leave the non-residential, the commercial and the industrial, are there any questions?
It's a lot of information we're throwing at Adam,
Okay.
Kelly, and James for the record.
Okay, so let's talk about the residential design standards. And actually, when you start looking through the master document, the way we've got it crafted, we're going to be talking about sections 8.72 and 8.73. And you may start to think, okay, why do we already we're setting this up as two separate sections? Well, there's a reason. 873, and I'm going to kind of go from the back and work our way forward, are the multifamily design standards. Similar to the commercial and the office standards, what we've identified in this specific section are standards to kind of supplement the zoning code and identify key components to work within the building and the massing. So like James was using the examples earlier, we're trying to break the building, that vertical mass. So it's not just one big wall. We're trying to create those roof line components so that, like in the image that you see here, those peaked roofs as compared to some of the flats. So some of the other things, we start looking at the horizontal mass. We start looking at the change of materials. We start looking at color variations, the use of balconies, awnings, projecting walls, things like that. So it's a very similar type of approach to the commercial standards. And these are specific to multifamily. Why? Because we know that there's a little bit easier to create some flexibility in building designs here, and we want to definitely encourage those. But at the same time, we don't want to just not say anything about it, because ultimately, if there's not a specific standard, our concern is always that folks will go to the least common denominator for a building. Now, backing up a little more into single family, which would be 872. This one is a big item because, as you can see in the gray box and also the highlight, this is a consent component. There's a voluntary consent that an applicant must consent to or agree to in order for the city to regulate these types of elements. 160D 72B is very, very specific as it relates to 1 and 2 family dwellings, and the fact that you cannot just as a right, like you do certain things like the number of parking spaces or signage or landscaping and trees, that you can't regulate single family and duplex design components the way you would other areas of the city. So I know that this was a concern or discussion that we were having early on, that the various groups within the city were wanting to make sure that there were certain standards that, hey, can we ask for or require certain things as it relates to single family so we don't get the same things. And clearly state there is a way to do it in that, but it's under this voluntary consent statement, and there's a process that goes along with that as well. And we've made sure to be very clear, as both in the references to 160D as well as the statement, so that we're being consistent with those aspects of it. You can see that there are certain design guidelines and what the intent is and the elements that we address within that specific section of the UDO. But there again, this is a voluntary component. And I'm going to pause there for just a second and see if there's any questions as it relates to either the multifamily or the single family. Hearing none. So let's talk a little bit about landscaping, including buffering the fences and the walls. And this is actually section 8.3 of the UDO. And what we're talking about there are components that, we actually break it out as far as for new development as well as redevelopment. We don't want to penalize all redevelopment for a couple of different reasons. Why? Depending on how we define redevelopment in some of those standards, we can actually be more punitive in the way we apply components of the UDO. So we've added in provisions that, if there's not a increase in the floor area, so basically the amount of building that's there, or we're not increasing by more than 20% the amount of impervious, and that's basically sidewalks and parking and things that are covered by a hard surface. So we've got standards that actually differentiate between what would then kick into the full-blown landscape standards. And there again, we're talking about new structures. We're talking about improvements, expansions, and additions that have a certain percentage increase over what's currently on the ground today. We did provide a series of standards within the UDO, including the landscape plans, and we've identified specific provisions for that. We've also identified standards for the plant types and materials. So we've identified the types of trees, the types of shrubs, and how those are to be utilized. And then we start getting into the buffers and the perimeter buffer standards. And this is going to be something we're going to spend a little bit of time on in just a second. And I know it's a little difficult to see on the screen here, but what we did is we created a series of, if you look down the left-hand side of this, it says perimeter buffer type, and that's 1 through 5. And then going across to the right, it says option 1, option 2, and option 3. Similar to what we've been talking about as we've been developing the UDO, it's all about flexibility, but at the same time, ensuring that what the city wants is what the city is going to end with at the end of the day. So what we've said was, okay, there's some flexibility because we realize every site, every piece of property, every project is not the same. And we use that, we've talked about that previously, and I'll use another example of fast food. A Chick-fil-A is not the same as a McDonald's or even a PDQ, but yet they get grouped together because they're all technically fast food. So what we've come up with are some variations. So there's minimum standards and maximum standards, similar to what we've done with the parking and some of our building setbacks. So depending on what the property is zoned that you are currently developing and what it's up against or adjacent to. So basically what's new being up against what's existing. And that way we start identifying what type of buffer do we actually require on the piece of property that's being developed. And depending on whether it's a 1 through 5, we'll start to line out what type of buffer, whether it is 7.5 feet with these type, either a certain number of trees or a certain number of shrubs, or in the case of like a type 3, it's 15 feet with, and then you get those options. We do also have provisions in there so that we are allowing some creativity in the buffer design, so that it's not like there's not a tree every 30 feet along that property. We do allow some clustering and some groupings of those, but we also identify that there is a maximum space between trees. There again, the reason we do that is because we realize there's utility easements, there's driveways, there's overhead power lines, there may be sight lines for whatever. And we don't want to be so strenuous in our code to where there's not that flexibility. So it can also look a little bit more natural than that row of 10 soldiers that we sometimes refer to. So when we start looking at some of these standards, this is what we're talking about. And what you see on the screen here is a buffer type 1 in the upper left, buffer type 3 upper right, and then the lower left is the buffer type 5, which is our most extreme. So buffer type 1 is going to be those that are just, I mean, it's there, but it's not trying to really visually screen a building or a use from the adjacent use. Those are going to be very similar types of uses. It may be more of like an office to an office or a multifamily to other townhouses or something like that. So it's where there's more of a similar type of use, and it really doesn't need that additional buffering or protection from the adjacent properties. When you look at type 3, we get into a little bit wider buffer. We get into a few more trees, and we also start with the addition of a 6-foot tall fence. Now, one of the questions that we started looking at early on in the process is, where do we put the fence as it relates to the trees? And what happens a lot of times, and what we've seen is that, developers will put the fence on the outside or getting adjacent to the property line, and then put all the trees on the interior for their residents. We're not saying that they can't have trees on the inside of the wall, but we're saying that the exterior has to look like this. So that the wall itself needs to be on the back side of the buffer, and the trees and the shrubs between the wall and the property line and the adjacent use. Similarly, on type 5, you'll see that we've provided for a berm as well as additional trees. So you start almost creating 100% what we call opacity. So that continuous wall as well as a continuous wall of trees and shrubs. So those are the types of things where you have potentially, I'll say not necessarily incompatible uses, but maybe it's an industrial next to an office setting where we're okay with it being there, but we just want to make sure that they're screened appropriately. So to give you a kind of an example, the GB, which is your general business, adjacent to the office medical, which is one of the proposed districts we're talking about, would require that type 3 buffer between it. So the fence and the number of trees and the shrubs. Now, the other thing that I will tell you, and I'm going to go back on this, when you read across on number 3, that there again, it's still the 15-foot width, but you can vary the number of trees and the number of shrubs. The one thing that's still kind of locked in is that fence. Now, the other thing that I will say is there's nothing in our code that is so strict that there's not a design alternative or a variance opportunity for a specific hardship. We wanted to make sure, here's the standard, but at the same time, the applicant always has the ability to come through and ask for some modification to the standard based on a justification or a reason. Any questions on the buffers or the table at this point?
Kelly, Mayor Pro Tem Hollowell, just got an observation. Can we put a restriction where they cannot be Bradford pear trees?
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, sir. I don't think we allow Bradford pears at all. Growing up in East Tennessee and living in Knoxville, Bradford pears are great to look at when they're a couple of years old, but after that, they are smelly, unsightly, and the branches don't hold up. So great comment. And no, we do not allow the Bradford pears.
Okay, Kelly, Freddie Gordon here again. Council member, Freddie Gordon. How about that fence? Are material specifics there? Or
Yes,
can
sir.
they just be of anything?
Yes, sir. Great question. And actually, and James, I don't remember what section we have it in off the top of my head, but we do have provisions for the types of materials. We do allow certain types of fence where we're in a rural setting versus the urban settings, but we do get into specific fence materials. So it can't be like chain link with the slats.
Yeah, okay. Well, that won't be in this presentation then, apparently. Is that right?
James, correct me if I'm wrong, we did not incorporate that, but while I'm talking, James can pull that up for us and he can talk about it in just a second.
Well, it's not that big a deal, but you know, any of us who've been involved in this before for any length of time, you know, most of these commercial developments and things, they stick out the least expensive wood that deteriorates quickly, you know, and so that's my concern. So I was just curious about that.
Yes, sir. And we do provide, like I said, those material types. And there is a difference when you start looking at the fence versus a wall. And yeah, I'm understanding exactly what you're talking about because we've run into that before, and that was also one of the reasons that we were saying that the fence needs to be on the interior versus the exterior.
Right.
So, you know, heaven forbid the fence does not hold up or whatever, we at least still have the trees and the shrubs growing.
Yeah.
And for the record, James Zerman, yeah, I do have that section up right now, Kelly. If you'd like, I can read it out loud.
Sure.
That really, it must be constructed of materials including brick and stone, stucco over concrete, treated wood, wrought iron, composite fencing, PVC vinyl, and other materials as approved by the Department of Planning and Development. So there is a list there, but if there are items that aren't necessarily thought through, there is a potential to approve those as well.
Very good questions.
Yeah, great question.
Any other questions while we're on the buffers? Okay, seeing none. So this is one of the series of graphics that we talk about throughout the code, throughout the UDO, and how and where those get applied. So we wanted to make sure that, you know, where we have text, it's very clear that, like on the image on the left, there is a street yard buffer, and that's defined in the UDO. We have a buffer on the left-hand side of that that says adjacent residential land use. So we've identified what that buffer. So basically, what we're doing is providing that kind of look in to see how it would actually be applied from a project perspective, so that you can see, you know, and anybody can take a look at the code, read the code, but at the same time, what we've always talked about is a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, let's show what we're talking about and how those actually get applied in these settings. So these types of images are in there for representation and those graphical examples. There are some that actually have some code types of language to it, but in the case where there's the text of course prevails. The one
Kelly,
on the, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, this is Coach Furr, for the record. And I hate to back up just a second here, but I'm computer illiterate. It took me 10 minutes to figure out which button to hit. Could you answer a couple of questions on the landscape standards there?
Yes, sir.
Why is it not being a certified landscape architect designing these designs, just like we do down at our parks here? And number two, who's going to approve it for the city, even if it is certified landscape architect? And number three, on your plant list, there's no size designations. In other words, let's say trees are 2 to 2.5 inches, blah, blah, blah. So there's a few questions I'd like to get answered on that landscaping, where we don't just have a smorgasbord of plants thrown out there.
Good question. And part of that also comes back to, like you were saying, the landscape plan. James, I know we had talked about the certified landscape architect, but there's some other alternatives that we've seen be used, whether it's a landscape designer, nursery, or something like that, that are just as competent. So we didn't necessarily want to restrict. However, if that is the wishes of the city, we can absolutely provide some additional language as it relates to that. And James, I thought that our landscape architects had actually provided minimum standards as far as installation for the various types of trees.
Yeah, for the record, James Zerman, I'm just going through some of that code right now, Kelly. But yeah, no, I think, you know, as you said, it's certainly something we can add to the standards of the code there. And I believe we do have some of those standards for the installation as well. And I'm just trying to find that section right now as I scroll through it here.
Yeah, in the meantime, though, we will absolutely go back and take a look at that. We'll get with our landscape architects that we're working with. Those guys are certified because that's the only people I actually trust myself. But yeah, we will confirm both the species types as well as the height at installation. Yeah, and actually, your canopy trees have to be a minimum 8 feet with 2-inch caliper. So there's some standards in there. So we'll make sure that those are very clear and that's meeting the expectations of the city. Very good comment, though. Thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'm going to go
Before
ahead.
you guys continue, from a staff perspective, this is Majib, Chicon City Attorney. We've got Richard Yurchek logged in twice, and I don't know if Coach Furr was logged in as Yurchek because we're just trying to make sure we have the list of everybody who's here for the minutes. And
Okay, yeah, I'm over at Richard's office. As I said, I'm computer illiterate with the flip up phone. So he was kind enough to put me on a computer. And that's why you have two of them on here. I'm up at the top right-hand side, the good-looking guy up in the top right-hand corner.
we appreciate your clarification. And so that solves our concern. So Coach Furr, you're in, I think you did not answer the roll call earlier, but so we'll note you're there. And then Richard Yurchek, you were logged in but did not respond to the roll call. Are you here, or have you muted and shut down your camera and are not actually in the room? I'm going to take that as he's muted, shut down his camera, and is not in the room. But we just need a clarification on.
As I know, he's in the other room on another phone, so I don't know.
Are we clear to keep moving on, or do we have any other questions or any other procedural items we need to make sure are covered?
Kelly, this is Majib. You can go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, sir. So there again, we've got those graphics like you see in the upper right, that kind of there when we start talking about some of the interior landscaping, how those actually get applied in a potential setting, just so that, you know, there's an understanding of what we're talking about and why. Another item is, of course, the tree preservation standards, and under 838 of the proposed UDO, we do have requirements for a preservation plan of certain types of trees and meeting certain standards. I know that's one of those things that we always get several questions about, especially when folks start asking, is it just the deciduous versus evergreen? What are the sizes and how are certain things? There's actually a master list and a master series of standards that the state of North Carolina actually utilizes as part of some of their tree preservation components. So we're trying to utilize as much of that as possible. We have, like I said, reviewed those, and if there's specific things that individuals wanted to be able to make sure are addressed as part of tree preservation, then, you know, we can definitely include that as part of the continuing discussion as in the development of the UDO.
This is Jennifer Smith.
Yes, ma'am. How are we doing tonight?
Good. I have a question. Is, say 4 or 5 years, 10 years down the line, and these trees or plantings die out, is there any responsibility of anybody to replace those, or how does that configure in it?
And I'm actually going to defer to staff, especially as it relates to an approved site and development plan. And I'm not sure if that would become a code enforcement related issue on the replacement of a required tree. I would assume so, but I'm not going to speak out of turn here, Lisa.
Good afternoon again, Lisa Stywinter with City of Monroe. Well, for commercial type development, of course, or even residential subdivisions, if there are required plantings that do die, we would do enforcement and require those to be replaced. A lot of times with your residential subdivisions, you have your homeowners associations that usually maintain and keep the trees healthy and living. Otherwise, we do provide enforcement on those matters.
Councilwoman Anthony, I have a question. In older neighborhoods where trees were not planted, are they just grandfathered in?
Yes. Now, if it was an older development or neighborhood and they were to expand their floor area or their impervious surface, then some of the landscaping requirements may come into play at that time. But as far as existing development that doesn't choose to, provide any additions or redevelopment, yes, they would be grandfathered.
I have one more question, Jennifer Smith again. And I know this is off the track of the plantings, but I had one question after I figured out how to unmute this. Back to the fencing, if it was disclosed for vinyl fencing, I've seen a lot of fencing in especially subdivisions where it gets mold on it and can go on they don't seem to do anything about it. I don't know if that is the homeowners association's responsibility in a subdivision or, to keep that clean or intact. Does the same thing go along with that for fencing requirements? If it rots, if it's wood, that it has to be replaced?
If it's an existing fence that's starting to deteriorate or dilapidate as far as, wood rotting or missing planks or something of that nature, yes, it would be an enforcement. But as far as mold, that's not something that we would enforce. And now keep in mind that these fence materials that are proposed within this ordinance, these are all draft. So if, council or planning board decides, or, as we review any of these sections, we decide that we just want to remove that type of material from the fence requirements, this is the time to do that. So we can certainly look at that as well. But as far as mold, we can't really enforce that. But if it is, fencing that is falling or, dismantled, yes, we can enforce that.
And I'm going to apologize, this is Kelly. I'm just making a couple of quick follow-up notes for us on this end, Lisa. Okay, so we also, I'm gonna go ahead and go on there again. Love the questions, and I definitely appreciate that. And there again, if we need to go back because somebody's having issues coming off of mute, no problem whatsoever. We definitely want to make sure you walk away here with at least some semblance of an answer, or us with a takeaway to get back with staff with a specific response for you. So other provisions within that portion of the UDO, of course, we have our tree preservation components. We do discuss the service area screening, including the outdoor display of components, and then kind of circling back around with the fences, the walls, and the berms, including like it says right there, including limitations on barbed wire. I know we do provide certain components of that, especially where it's within an agricultural setting and certain other instances. We realized that you're not going to necessarily have barbed wire in the downtown area, but there are some of your outlying areas where the city is abutting the county, where a barbed wire fence is probably more appropriate than some of the other fence types that we're talking about. So we just want to make sure we had those identified in the UDO. And then one of the things, and I did make a comment to confirm back with our landscape architect with respect to the tree standards and the maintenance, is also re-looking at the approved plant list just to make sure that we're good with the species that we're providing as far as the large, the medium, et cetera. And of course, when we start talking about the height and the width, we're talking about that maturity. And then we will confirm exactly the minimum standards for planting as well as tree replacement. So James, I'm making a note of that as well, just to be confirmed. If there's no other questions on the landscaping, we're going to move into cluster subdivisions. And I know, Lisa, you've probably got some input or some thoughts on this as well. So if you want to tag team on this one or provide some comment as we're going, please feel free to do so. But cluster subdivisions, and you can see the components right there. And I've got some examples to kind of help illustrate what we're talking about. But our conventional subdivisions, kind of like some of your older existing neighborhoods, when those were laid out, they were laid out mostly in a grid pattern. They didn't set aside open space. It was almost like a cookie cutter approach to a lot of the lot sizes. Now, and I will say that there's some tremendous architecture in and around the downtown in some of these conventional neighborhoods that you see. But when you start getting out into some of the transitional areas, the suburban areas where we're seeing those transitions from the urban, suburban to the rural, what we start seeing, especially in practice today, is more of that kind of plan unit development type approach. So where we've got areas that we want to try to preserve, we want it to incentivize from a single family approach. So, if you're willing to do the cluster subdivision, then, there are some offsets that we can do with that, or we're proposing as part of this, which is, a density increase, decrease of the lot sizes. But there are the trade-offs there that, it requires at least 30% open space, 3 different housing types, and we start to define those, what is a housing type itself, and must provide those interconnected neighborhoods and those connections. And this becomes that either or situation. So it's an opt-in type of deal. We're not saying that somebody has to utilize the cluster. They can go out there and develop a conventional subdivision, no questions, no qualms, no nothing. But if you're willing to do certain things, then we're willing to potentially offset some of those higher design components. So what does that look like? So in the case of this one, and I've got a couple of different scenarios here, this property is about, it's 9.35 acres, 8 total lots. Each lot is about an acre, excluding the roadway. And as you can see, there is 0 open space. So basically they utilize the full extent of the 9-acre property between the lots and the road. Now, we did highlight the trees that were kind of utilized from a buffer standpoint, but those are either on existing lots or along the existing lot line. And those actually are not required per your UDO, nor most codes to date do that. So if we went to a cluster opportunity, whoops, too much. Let's assume that there was not a density bonus and we had a provision for 50% open space. What does that look like at the end of the day? Well, you still have your 8 lots. The road probably is a little bit smaller. We just continue to kind of keep it where it was from a graphic standpoint. The lot sizes go to below about a half an acre in size, and you can see there's 50% open space. Now, this is a pretty simplistic approach. There's different variations that you could have, but just for the discussion today, we just wanted to kind of keep apples to apples working through. If you wanted to go the route of the incentive, then you're getting that 30. In this case, it's 33% open space. It's approximately 10 lots. still about a half acre per lot. And yet some people start to question me when I do the math, and it's like, yeah, you're doing more lots, but you're also reducing down the amount of open space. Hence the reason the lots are a little bit larger than the ones before. So that's just kind of giving you a couple of ideas and options, especially on a smaller scale. And I'm just going to kind of flip back through those. Whoops, too far. And Lisa, did you want to interject anything at this point, or are you good?
Lisa Stywinter, not at this point.
That was my cheap way of trying to get a drink of water. Sorry about that. So there's the conventional, the cluster with no density incentives, and then the cluster with density incentives. And there again, this is out there for the council and the planning board's comments and thoughts.
Lisa Stywinter here, Planning and Development. One thing I do want to point out is the goal for them to be able to cluster and get smaller lot sizes and an increased density is so that we are able to have voluntary consent that they would comply with some residential design guidelines. So if they're willing to do a cluster development, then we would expect them to voluntarily consent to provide those residential design guidelines. And also we would have, a decent amount of open space. We would be looking for amenities, but they would get a little bit smaller lot size and an additional density of 2 units.
It's a little empty, but is that purely voluntarily?
Yes, but they would, if they were not willing to voluntarily consent to the residential design guidelines, then they would not be allowed to do the cluster development. So they wouldn't get the additional density and they wouldn't get the smaller lot sizes.
Any other questions on, because like I said, this is the small scale approach. I'm going to show you another one that's a little bit larger. And I've actually been questioned on this one before as to some of the math, but so let's look at that one. So this is a graphic that was actually drawn by one of our folks here. This is part of a much larger residential project. The phase that you're seeing right here is what we call neighborhood 1 or phase 1. It's about 422 acres, 732 lots. You can see the gross density. But yeah, this is part of a 1,000-acre project. It's a little over 2,050 total residential units. So roughly 2 dwelling units per acre at the end of the day. This piece, the specific phase of the project actually has 4 housing types, what we call the 10,000 square foot or greater lots, 6 to 10,000 square foot lots, less than 6,000, and then attached, so 2 family dwellings as well. So those are the 4 housing types that are proposed as part of this. The open space for this specific phase, when you start looking at the buffers, the environmental habitats, which are the darker green areas, the lakes, and some of those common facilities, those blue areas, that actually accounts for about 42% of this site. Now, when you look at the overall project, that 1,025 acres, they're actually coming in about 36% of the site is set aside as part of those habitats, common areas, buffers, and some of their internal park spaces as well. And you can kind of see the breakdown between the 207 acres and how it's broken out. Now, what's really interesting is this was a graphic that was drawn, we'll say a couple of years before this image. So what we did is actually clip the image from the aerial to show how this actually developed at the end of the day. So when we did this project, you can see it's a lot easier to see the open spaces and things like that in the parks. This is what's actually been developed. Now, you may look at that and go, oh, no, this is not what we want to see. But believe it or not, this is the exact same project that you just saw. So 1.7 dwelling units per acre, about 42% open space after native habitats. And that's some of our like forested areas, some of our wetlands. some native habitat and protection areas from a species perspective. And then we created those lakes as well as an amenity feature. So that actually is a project that is constructed and would meet your overall cluster standards as well. Now, I didn't want to scare you by showing you something that was this large, but also wanted to make sure that you could see that it could be a small scale, it could be a large scale, but as Lisa said, it's going to be a voluntary type consent.
Kelly, this is Coach Fur again. On this project, on these houses, do you remember what size houses, square footage there were? Were there different sizes?
Absolutely, great question. And this is Kelly. So the ones up in the upper right, those are actually, they've got a rear access alley. Those are anywhere between 12 to 1,800 square feet. The ones in the bottom right of the image are actually about 28 to 3,600 square feet under roof. So there is quite a difference between those. Very good question. I was actually kind of amazed that our land planner was able to be as accurate as he was, and our engineers were able to follow that to this level when it was actually constructed at the end of the day. Lisa, anything on the clusters at this point?
I don't think there's any additional information now, as long as no one else has any other questions.
So before we go any further, and I guess this is just a general check-in question for the mayor, the council, planning board, do we want to take a quick break to let folks get a drink of water, or do we want to keep powering through because we've got our open space and then our zoning map components?
Salute, Anthony. Are we halfway through?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would suggest a short break.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, I concur with Salute. What about 5 minutes perhaps?
Good for me.
Okay.
Perfect. So
Kelly,
yes, sir.
Kelly, Freddie Gordon, council member again. On this, just looking at these higher density clusters here, subdivisions, the last two slides you showed, and it might be philosophical, but we're just starting to see some larger designs like this, and it's hard for, I think, some. I don't want to speak for anybody else. Maybe it might be a little harder for us to understand how you can mix 1,200 and 3,600 square foot houses in a subdivision and sell them or find them appealing or whatever the term is. Well, what's your thought on that? And is this just because we might be somewhat new at this kind of growth, or what's the situation? Everybody wants to attach size with desire, but we all know in this whole world, everybody can't afford 36 or 5,600 square feet. So that's just my thought. Is this just a sort of a challenge that comes with growth or not?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And you can see from the four housing types off to the side, those 10,000 square foot lots where we have those, we'll say roughly the 3,600 square foot lots or houses, there's only 30 of those. What you see the vast majority of are those 6,000 to 10,000 square foot lots. So that's that 18 to 2,600 square feet. When you look at the less than 6,000, and they were purposely kind of laid out. So there we have the main spine road, but everything's interconnected. And then off of that spine road are different kind of sub neighborhoods or sub communities, so that, it's not a 3,600 square foot house next to a 1,400 square foot house necessarily. There are some cases where we do have that, but we kind of set these up in smaller pods that could then be developed. So you've got similar types of houses within those areas. And that is something that, like I said, you're going to start seeing more and more. And it's not just a phenomenon in and around Charlotte Metro. I mean, you're seeing a lot more of that around there, but most of your metro areas, is your high growth areas, you're starting to see more of your national home builders. You'll start seeing more of this type of approach.
Hey, Freddie, we saw this at Lake Park and we saw it again at Bonterra, and they didn't have any trouble at all.
Richard, could you identify yourself?
I'm sorry,
please?
This is Richard Yurchek from
And
Planning
Richard,
Board.
you're here because you noted you did not answer the roll call, so we wanted to verify that you are indeed here.
I am here. It is really me. There's two of me right now. One is a very attractive looking older gentleman with the golf course behind him.
Right.
No, this type of project.
Don't like all that older now.
That's just because he's good looking. I can say that.
That's right.
So we've seen this design already in our area, which was Bonterra and Lake Park, where they went from, basically townhouses or zero lot line, little houses where you didn't have to cut your grass, you just planted flowers and your HOA cut your grass, to, some pretty monster homes, in those areas. So, we're not doing anything new. This has already been done within a 5 or 6 mile radius of the city of Monroe. So, this is what we're seeing, what people want. Lake Park with its village and a little bit of shopping and, a little restaurant or two down there. I mean, that's a very popular place. So
I would, Freddie Gordon again, I would agree. I just think that for a number of us, if it is something, it is what's desired now, rather than the one house per acre. And it's something going forward that we're all going to have to get a little more used to, because, as you say, the marketplace is dictating it. It's truly what more people want. And we're just going to have to get used to it. But of course, as it's proposed, I don't know how the word gets out, but as soon as it gets proposed, we start getting emails from all over the county, of course, stating that they don't like it, they don't want it, they don't need it, they don't, this negativity, if you will. So all I'm saying is, for those of us in the city who are getting it, we're going to have to get a little more used to it, because it is what's being desired, and developers are going to provide.
Yeah.
And
again, it's Richard. The point is, we can't build for the people that are already here. We've got to build for the people we would like to come here. We've got to put projects together for the people we want to attract. And that's, to me is the most important thing. I'm with you in that, I would rather go into an area and bring my builder with me and have a acre or two and build something that I wanted, but that's not the way they do it anymore. And we haven't been doing it that way for a while.
Councilmember McGee here. I'd like to add too, Richard, I like that point. I think this model will also yield to more of diverse communities. I think having different size homes, different styles of homes. I think this would be an opportunity for us to diversify our communities a little bit more than what we do already have. So I totally like this cluster option.
Well, Freddie Gordon again, I don't want to take up your whole 5 minutes. I just wanted to throw that out, that it is obviously something that, that it is becoming and is more popular. So may not be for everybody, but I think our city is going to have to look forward to it, because we only have a certain amount of space to develop within the city, number one, and we do have the utilities for it, especially water and sewer. So we're going to see more of it. There's no doubt about it. Okay, I'll give you now 2 minutes to
Actually, Mayor and Madam Chair, this is Majib Shakan. I think you have a consensus of folks that want to take a 5-minute break. So it'd be up to the two of you to go ahead and declare a 5-minute recess and then ask that all the members return by about 5:09, if that is the will of the mayor and the chair.
Fine with me, council. If you'd like to take a 5-minute break, let's be back about 9.
This is Mary Ann Raspberry. And yes, the planning board would like to take a 5-minute break. So back at 5:09.
We are officially on board.
Well, the only thing that I didn't understand, and I want to bring this up before it goes any further.
Mute yourself.
Yeah, it took me forever to hit that button. Yeah, it's on.
The live stream is still recording for all those in the meeting.
Just saying, hey,
How
you
are
okay
you?
in here?
Yeah,
Okay.
nice and quiet.
All right, just check.
Mayor Kilgore to the council. Is everyone back? It's 9 minutes after.
Freddie Gordon here.
Mayor Kilgore to the council. It's about 9 minutes after. Everybody back. Do I need to call the roll?
Freddie Gordon here.
Gordon, Council Lady Anthony,
I'm here.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway,
Here.
Councilman James,
Here.
Councilman Kazire, Councilman McGee.
Here.
Thank you very much. Look like council is in seat, ready to go. If planning board is, whenever.
I need to call roll again.
You do not.
Okay.
That was, I think, just for the mayor to make sure that he had everyone back. It's up to you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Lisa, are we ready to go again?
Yes,
Green light?
sir.
Okay.
Please do.
I'm going to turn this next section over to James. I'm going to provide some commentary along the way, but James, why don't you take us through open space?
Great. For the record, James Zerman. So one of the things, and I think it's very a good spot where we were in the presentation, seeing how those cluster subdivisions come together to really segue into this this section of the code, the open space standards. What we've tried to do in the updated UDO is really craft some good standards that are going to require the introduction of some really codified open space sizes, whether that's parks or different type of activity centers. You're going to see a few different graphics throughout this showing what those open space types look like, what those sizes are, and really when they're required, whether it be a residential development, a non-residential, a mixed use, a planned. We really think through all that through these standards and provide those base level design standards as well to make sure we're implementing those open space types that people are going to want to utilize, that are going to be an attractive part of the community and really be kind of an important part moving forward. So Kelly, I think you can go ahead and jump to the next screen. So some of the open space types here, and you'll see that we've provided some graphical illustrations of these, whether they're things such as pocket parks that you might see in a typical residential community, particularly if you have a subdivision. Those are always great to include as a an area for kids to gather or just have community events. Things such as a green, which might provide a more informal play area or sports, things such as that, some open space amenities, a square, which might be a more organized and maybe more civic or city type feel to that, which you might see implemented throughout the city or in some sort of new developments along those arterial blocks. A neighborhood park, which I think would fit very well in what Kelly and Lisa were talking about in the previous screens, kind of providing that very large central gathering point in a large development or cluster subdivision where you can have those neighborhood amenities for people to use, meet up, use for any type of events. You see all sorts of cool stuff nowadays, things like yoga, just barbecues, anything like that. Those are always super useful in having those, particularly in a big community that you might see those. Amenity centers are things that a lot of us have seen, whether it's new type of developments, townhomes, planned developments that come through. Obviously, those are always very attractive type uses there.
James, Lisa
Yes.
Steinwinter here. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not able to hear you very good. So I just want to make sure everybody can hear you.
Yeah, and maybe I'm having a bit of a headset issue, Lisa. I apologize
Yeah,
on
that's
that.
a lot better. I think we can all hear you now. And
Great.
I know the open space is near and dear to all of us and making
For
sure we
sure.
get our proper green space and amenities. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And sorry for that technical hiccup. But as I was saying, the neighborhood parks, just to kind of retract on that a little bit, might be really great feature that you'll see in some of the larger conservation subdivisions or cluster subdivisions, amenity centers. That might be where you have pools, grills, things like that, and some type of organized townhome development. We also introduced the concept of plazas, which somewhat similar to squares that you'll see there, as well as linear parks. And these are pretty, unique features that you might see along bodies of water, whether that's going to be something like a bicycle path, scooters, rollerblades, kind of that more active, passive use that you'll see throughout those. So those are some of the open space types that we've went through and really introduced into the code there. Kelly, if you want to jump to the next screen for me, thank you so much. And as we said, we do categorize these in different ways. And some of these can be categorized in more than one size. We don't necessarily say that, for example, an amenity center has to be small. It can also be medium. So we have some flexibility there in how they're going to be introduced throughout the communities, right? So a small open space park might be something as simple as a 500 square foot pocket park, or it might go as complicated as a large development where we see those neighborhood parks that I alluded to before. So here is where we really start to control how they're categorized and that provide that range of acreage there as well. Going into the medium and large open spaces, these are where we have some of the larger type uses. And these are going to be really those 1 acre or greater or 2.5 acres or greater open space types that we see. So whether that's going to be things like the plaza or a large amenity center, we go ahead and introduce standards in the UDO here of how many they have to have open space types within these subdivisions or within these developments, and really going ahead and saying you have to include one of those, depending on how large your new development is. So this is going to be a great way moving forward in new developments to ensure that we're getting these amenities, we're getting these open spaces, and we're providing all these. As you can see on the screen here, the percentage requirements within the residential, less than 50 acres in size, we're going to require 1 small and 1 medium type open space. So maybe that's something like an amenity center and a pocket park. Greater than 50, we're going to go ahead and include a larger type of use as well, maybe a neighborhood park in addition to the amenity center. Now, we're not saying that you have to only do that. Of course, you can do greater and beyond that and really incorporate those throughout the design of the subdivision. But we wanted to ensure that we have those baseline standards. We're requiring a mix of those open space types. And then within those open space types too, another important part of that is really going to be this concept of whether it's an active type or whether it's a passive type of use. We want to make sure we provide a mix of whether it's just an open space with some greenery and gardens, or maybe we really want to ensure that we have those active walking, bicycling opportunities, areas for kids to play. We go ahead and designate all those different types of standards here as well. So we, I've gone through that in pretty good detail, and we're very happy with the draft of where we ended up with Lisa and her team over in the planning department thus far. Lisa, I know that I'm going to go ahead and take a break there. It's definitely an important topic. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to that and kind of the thought process behind it?
Just wanted to, Lisa Stywinter here, just wanted to add that currently within our current Unified Development Ordinance, we have some open space that we can require, but it certainly doesn't have any type of standards of how many different open space or amenities or pocket parks a subdivision has. The only way that we are getting any of that stuff right now is through the rezoning, conditional district rezoning process, and planning staff basically negotiating with the development team. So an open space section ordinance that spells out different sizes of open space and provides whether it's passive or active and a variety of different amenities that can be in open space is going to be a very good tool for staff to be able to work with developers going forward.
And if I could, this is Kelly Klepper again, and I wanted to kind of chime back in on something that James was talking about. When we start talking about things like the small and medium open spaces, one of the things that you'll see in here is no mention of like a tot lot or playground or things like that. And there's a couple of reasons why. What we found, and actually we came across this one in another community, was they were like, okay, so for the first 100 units, you have to have a tot lot. And they specifically said tot lot with the playground. Only problem is this was in a retirement or an age targeted community of 55 and older. So they actually had to go through the process to get a variance to the open space and park components. So this is another one of those where we wanted to have the flexibility based off of the type of development that we're looking at, what is best for that, and staff having that level of input as well. Okay, if there's
For
no,
the record, James,
Yep.
yeah, that's a great point, Kelly. Nope, just wanted to say, if there's any other questions on this, and Kelly, you can feel free to jump back in. Sorry to interrupt you.
no, you're
But
fine.
it's a pretty exciting new portion of the code that we're definitely excited to bring, to the city here for this.
Kelly, I have a comment. This is Jennifer Smith, planning board member. We're seeing more and more of developers bringing in projects that the properties are not only so close together to get more bang for their buck, I guess, that you could hand a sandwich to the person that's living next door to you just through the window. But the other thing that we're seeing is all of the houses pretty much look alike. They have a 6-foot entryway, and then the rest of the house is all garage. And you've got this blaring big white garage door. And every other house is the same and the same color. It seems like as long as they meet the requirements for materials, is there any way to regulate some type of, not every other home being exactly like the one next to it?
Yeah, and actually, great question. And I'm going to go defer back to something we were talking about earlier with the residential design standards. 160D actually precludes certain aspects of the single family from the 1 and 2 family component. So, there has to be a consent, so that has to be voluntary. Otherwise, we can't necessarily get into, we can't get into the types of materials and other things that, that you're kind of talking about at this point.
Lisa Stywinter here. Ms. Smith, just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, the residential projects that have been coming before Planning Board and City Council are part of that site-specific conditional district rezoning process. And right now, that is really it's a mutually agreed upon development between the developer and the city. So, the city has the ability to request conditions, and the developer has the ability to request deviation from ordinance standards. But through that process, the planning board, staff, city council, we can negotiate to get some of those, exterior building requirements or the additional open space and the amenities. But if there is a development that does not go through that conditional district process, and it's the residential development that is allowed by right on a residential 20,000 square foot piece of property, then we cannot require any type of design standards for those type of projects. So right now, our only tool is the conditional district rezoning process currently, but moving forward, we've developed that cluster subdivision type section that basically, if you voluntarily consent to design standards, and then you can get a couple, I think 2 units, additional 2 units per acre, and we would require a certain amount of open space. So that is kind of our way of trying to move forward with some type of standards within the ordinance that we can get quality development. Now, as far as your question goes to whether we can require, you can't have the same house on the same street in so many different lots. I think Kelly spoke to that I don't know if we legally can do that.
And this is Kelly Klepper again. And actually underneath our residential components where we are, of course, talking with the consent, one of the subsections we have in there is the architectural variability. And we do start to call out the number of houses that can be the same color, same types, so it does start to get into that level as a discussion point for staff. But there again, that's with that voluntary consent.
Thank you.
And Kelly, this is Coach Furr. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. One of my companies builds sportsplexes up and down the East Coast. And we've noticed lately, in fact, we're doing several of them in Harrisburg right now, that they're building sportsplexes and building the residential and commercial around the sportsplexes. Have you seen that being a trend in your development design?
We're seeing a lot of that, keeping in mind that Kimley Horn's a national firm. We do a lot of, I'll say, master plan communities as well as parks facilities like you're talking about, Coach. And we are seeing more and more of those integrated types of uses for a couple different reasons. One, you're doubling up on your open space provisions, your recreational components. You're not having to get in a car, drive 10 minutes to get to the sports complex. It's right there in your community. We've seen some studies that actually say that there's an increase in property valuations in those aspects as well. So yeah, we are seeing more and more of those integrated types of uses. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on to the zoning map? Now, before I hand this back to James, I am going to say, I'll kind of give my public service announcement speech on this one is, we're not intending tonight to get into the individual property level. There's going to be a significant amount of time that we are rolling this out so that there can be the public review, public comment. We are working, I know right now you're looking at a static map, which is of the city's existing zoning. And there again, this is a PDF, so it's a static map. We've also created those for the proposed zoning and where we're doing certain conversions of districts. But the information that we're preparing is in a GIS, that Geographic Information System database. So it's that computerized mapping so that the city staff can actually go zoom in and look at individual properties and individual components of the city versus looking at it, what you're seeing right here, which is a small image and there's very limited amount of detail that we have at this point. But we did want to just kind of identify and let you know that there is a pretty significant process that's getting ready to be unveiled and rolled out as it relates to that. And I know there's been quite a bit of discussion with the legal team as far as ensuring what we do, how we do, and when we do it from if we're changing the zoning designation and ensuring property rights and certain notification processes. And I will say that we did have prior to COVID, we did have a very good discussion with the legal team. So I believe we're all on the same page when it relates to that. So like I said, this is what your current zoning map looks like right now with all of your zoning districts. What we're proposing, and this is where I'm gonna turn it back to James, it's this version. Now, first thing you're going to see is there's a lot of different colors on there, but I don't want you thinking that we're going through and doing a significant amount of or massive amount of rezonings of individual properties. Some of it is just the name change and the coloration change, but there are some changes that you're going to see and hear where we're converting certain properties, we'll say to the equivalent or the next highest zoning district. James?
Yeah, thanks for that, Kelly. No, that's for the record, James Zerman. It's a great explanation of really what we're kind of proposing here tonight is showing you that current zoning and then the proposed zoning, because within the UDO, we have gone ahead and changed some of these districts and changed names. And we've introduced some new concepts as well, such as the mixed use districts, which we've previously discussed with the city. So on your left, you'll see the key of all the new different zoning districts that we have. As well as the Concord Avenue Overlay District. And thanks for that, Kelly. And these are going to be the new names. And what we'll do as we walk through this is we've actually provided a screenshot of each district so everyone can get an idea of how that looks throughout the city. And we can also explain a little bit further about what those districts previously were categorized as in the current UDO. So I think we'll just go ahead and jump in, Kelly. So the first one was the Concord Avenue overlay there that we can see right along Concord Avenue. Now we haven't made a lot of changes to that district. So that's going to be pretty much standard and the same as it is now. As we know, the city went through a lot of work getting that overlay up and running. So we really have not gone in and touched that too much. So that should be pretty common for everyone on the call today. One of the other things we did was the conditional districts. We've gone ahead and plotted out where those conditional districts are throughout the city. And as Lisa stated earlier, those are really the kind of the rezoning process through that conditional zoning process that they come in do those different types of developments. And then those standards are more or less locked in and site-specific standards included for all those developments. So we just wanted to show kind of an overview of where those are hitting. Moving in, and this is where we can start talking about some of these new mixed use districts that we've previously talked about. The first one is the Community Corridor 1 mixed use district. And this is actually implemented in 2 geographic areas here that you can see on your screen. And what those will do actually is provide for those updated mixed use standards that we've previously discussed. So this is really where we're going to allow those mixture of uses with retail, residential, and really provide that kind of new, different kind of considerations when we're talking about somewhat form-based code, but really not form-based, really more mixed use code that we've developed with Lisa and the team there in the planning department. So that's one of those new mixed use areas. The second one, we have the Community Corridor, and this would be the MX2 district. Now this is going to be actually a little bit less intense. And so these are a little more almost neighborhood mixed use type feels where we have less intense uses, and we're going to locate those along those 2 areas that you see on the city map there. The downtown center. Now this previously in the existing code was really always known as the commercial business district or the CBD. This is really the heart of the city here, obviously the downtown core. And what we've gone ahead is work with the planning staff to designate those properties that previously may have been commercial business district, and we're incorporating those new standards for the new mixed use development that we'll see in the downtown district here. Now kind of hugging on the outside of that, and I know it's a little bit tough to see when we have these very large zoomed out maps, but that's going to be the downtown gateway. So these are properties that are more or less hugging that downtown core, where we thought it appropriate to include some of those new mixture of uses and really add to that downtown area, being respectful of what's there and what we'd like to see moving forward based upon some of the city approved plans like the downtown master plan, and some of those other ordinances that we've previously gone through. The medical mixed use, you'll see there along the medical center. This is really going to be a little bit of a different medical or a little bit of a different mixed use district where the uses permitted within here are going to be more similar to what we would see for a medical campus style development, allowing for a mixture of retail, office, medical uses, and also some of those typical residential uses that we might see, including things such as townhomes and really some of this style of almost like student housing type uses that we might see attract along those medical campus corridors. And so that's definitely a very unique district that we've spent some time with the planning staff discussing and kind of finalizing that. The regional mixed use, this is going to be really along that northern portion of the city here. And these are going to be some of the more maybe larger retail style developments that we see, or some of those larger anchor developments that provide a mixture of uses, some high density residential uses there along kind of where the growth in the city is going to start moving to when we see along that northern portion there. Office medical. So this previously was referred to in the current UDO as OT or office transitional. And these are some of those transitional areas that we might see along the downtown area where we're going to have a lot more office type uses that will more or less transition or play as a buffer between some of the residential or traditional neighborhoods that we see outside of the downtown. So there we have more or less, you'll see a lot of green scattered throughout the city where we have some of those current properties. General business. Now, this is definitely one of the most predominant uses, especially along 74 there that we see highlighted here. Those are going to be a lot of the larger style developments for retail. And you can go ahead and see that they're spread throughout, mostly along the major corridors, and recognizing some of those larger retail establishments that the city has right now. Going off of that, you'll also notice that we crafted a neighborhood business district. So this is something that in examining how the retail establishments were kind of scattered throughout the town, or the city, I mean, sorry for that, scattered throughout the city, we went ahead and said, well, let's see if there's opportunities to really have less intense commercial uses off of some of those major corridors. And those are going to be some of those smaller neighborhood establishments, smaller restaurants, smaller shops that are really closer immediately to some of the residential. And we wanted to make sure we included those because they can be a little different than some of the big box style retail developments that we see along the major corridors. General industrial. So here you'll recognize some of the areas of the city that are more industrial in nature right now. And we wanted to go ahead and actually provide two different industrial districts. You'll notice what we did here is provide the general industrial that you can see in that light gray. And Kelly, if you want to flip over, great, thank you. Heavy industrial. So these are maybe more heavy industrial uses, more intense industrial uses. And we wanted to provide areas in the city where new uses that may pop up will be located there. Maybe they're not appropriate for more business type industrial. Maybe these are some of more of those intense industrial uses. So we went ahead and actually crafted that district with those standards and applied them throughout the city here. Residential low density. So this was previously the R40 district in the current UDO. And here you'll notice, and no surprise, you think of some of those more low density residential developments, single family predominantly. And this is going to match up well with what's currently on the ground. And also a large portion of the south part of the city there where we might have some more open space development, some less intense residential uses right now. And we've mapped those out accordingly throughout the city as well. Stepping up from that, we have the residential medium density, which was previously the R20 district in the code. And these really are kind of transfers over of what we would see in the the medium density residential type uses here. So this is where we might start allowing some more townhome style developments, some villas, things such as that, in addition to some of the single family detached uses. The residential high density was previously the RMF district within the code. And these are going to be where we allow some of those higher pockets of density, multifamily apartments, condominiums, things like that. And you'll notice they're clustered closer to corridors, closer to the downtown, places where, you know, some of these high intensity residential uses make sense to place. And that kicks off the zoning map. And I wanted to pause there. I know that's a lot of maps. We wanted to really just provide that overview, as Kelly said, kind of that 5,000 foot overview look at some of those districts, how those are playing out, how those are going to work together with the district standards that we've written, that we've talked about previously for the traditional and mixed use districts there. So if there's any opportunity for questions now, I think, you know, we're happy to take those.
Coach Furr here. I live in the National Historical District on Roosevelt or Franklin Street. Are you going to work with designs implementing around for the Monroe Society, Historical Society, and the National Historical Society in your designs?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I know we have some of those historic districts throughout the city. And we do have some of those standards built in of what is permitted and not permitted as far as design standards, as far as the processes that you have to go through to change anything like that. And I'll certainly let Lisa jump in here too if she has any further thoughts on that. And Kelly, feel free to jump in there too.
I think we just put Lisa on the spot.
Oh, I'm not to put you on the spot, Lisa. Sorry.
Lisa Stywinter here. No, I didn't hear you call me. As far as we currently have historic district design guidelines, and if some of you may recall, and I know you do, that the city received a grant to go through the process to update those design guidelines. Those are already in place. As far as properties that are located outside of our local historic district, then those design guidelines would not apply to those properties, and it would be the Union County Historic Preservation Commission. So yes, we do have a historic district overlay district. We do have processes in place of how one would repair their home, and we do have recently updated design guidelines for the historic district. Are there any additional questions? And I know the zoning map was a lot of information. It's our first step in the public review process. It's basically just to kick it off, introduce it. It's at a high level. We recognize that. There will be additional review and revisions, and there will definitely be additional public meetings for everyone to have an opportunity to review these various different zoning districts.
Lisa, Jennifer Smith, Planning Board member. I have a question. If somebody bought a lot that was in the historic district, would they have to conform to the guidelines in building that home so it represented the area well?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. And that is within our design guidelines. So, not only, additions, repairs, or renovations, but new construction would adhere to those guidelines if it's property located with that local historic district. So yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Lisa, Freddie Gordon, council member here. So you talked about it. We did a timeline, and I am just curious, those future meetings, and really I thought I'd heard in something previous that we were going to start this on January 1 of 2021. So, but apparently that didn't go down. So when exactly would you expect that this might go into play?
Well, Lisa Steinwinter, that's a very good question. And staff has been discussing that amongst our team. The 160D was supposed to go into effect January 1st. Due to COVID, that has been delayed to July 1st. In an ideal world, it would be great if we could get the ordinance and the map adopted by that July 1st deadline, but we are almost in April. And we certainly would not want to rush the zoning map portion of it as far as the public review. So we're hoping by the end of the summer. We may, I know I talked to Majib Shakan, the city attorney, earlier today, and it may be that we end up having to do a revision to our current ordinance to just meet that July 1st deadline for a month or so to have something in place so we meet our legal requirements. But we have a meeting with Kimley Horn and Associates tomorrow at 2:00, and we can certainly talk additionally about our timeline because I know we're ready. We're all anxious and we're ready for this project to get underway, and certainly don't want to end up rushing the public comment portion of the zoning map, though, if that kind of in a roundabout way answers your question.
Councilmember Gordon, this is Majib Shakan. Let me clarify. The issue is this. 160D, which changes the planning and zoning and development statutes in North Carolina, is already in effect. It, however, imposes requirements on cities that originally were to go into effect in August. They moved it up to July. They gave an extension and then pulled it back a little. So there are certain requirements in 160D that we have to have in our zoning ordinance. So it's possible that if we cannot have the full UDO and the zoning map ready for July 1, without sacrifice, without impacting the public ability to comment, and also to make sure that the public is aware of what all changes are being made, we may have a temporary set of changes that ensures that the city fully complies. So that's why you're hearing that. And it's something that from a staff perspective, yes, we do notice some concerns, but we are ready to make sure that we fully comply by July 1 and that your UDO ends up in the position it needs to be in so that everyone is aware of what changes are being made and that all the questions, especially the questions that you and the planning board have raised today, are answered.
So, so when you say temporary, you mean until the entire UDO is completed? So you're talking about hypothetically July?
Councilmember Anthony, the answer is what we're looking at is it would be in effect for July 1. So this temporary bridge ordinance would be in place. And then let's say hypothetically, the UDO is ready for adoption effective August 1, it would only be a month. But if it's September or October or November, you still are complying with all the areas of state law that have changed. So you have a bridge that is available for as long as we need it. The sincere hope is that we don't need it for very long, if we need it at all. I hope that answers your question.
It did, thank you.
For
And this
the
is Kelly
record,
Clapper.
James Zerman.
Excuse
Yeah,
me, I'm
no.
sorry. Oh,
Yep.
no,
I'll
I
let
was
you go
gonna
ahead and jump in,
say,
Kelly. Sorry, go right ahead.
No, and I was going to say, I'm trying not to lose my voice here, but I just wanted to kind of circle up. Yeah, we do have the discussion tomorrow with Lisa, so we'll be definitely mapping that out. But at the same time, also want to make sure, is there any other questions as it relates to the zoning map or any of the standards we've identified and provided for y'all tonight?
Yeah, let's coach for, is this going to be open to the public? Are we going to have it in an area where the public can come in and look over exactly what's being proposed again? I think we had that once before you make a final decision.
Coach Furr, this is Mujib Khan. The answer is we will make sure that whatever public comment or public input that we have is able to involve the public. It, of course, is going to depend on the continued evolution of the pandemic state of emergency. So if we can have only a few people in, we will do that. We will make sure that there are ways to ensure that the public has access and is able to provide comments based on whatever requirements that the governor has in the various executive orders.
Councilwoman Anthony, if
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, ma'am.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask if there was any other questions. I know I see a lot of people on mute. And I just want to make sure that those folks have the opportunity to ask any questions.
I believe Councilmember Anthony had a question.
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Anthony, if there are no questions and if the presentation is over, I will move that we adjourn.
Councilmember Anthony, this is Mujib Shakan. I would defer to our friends at Kimley Horn to tell us if they are indeed finished, and if they are, then, because it looks like a last slide is up, but I'll defer to them. And then if there were, and then I would defer to the mayor with respect to council on whether or not it wishes to adjourn. But you have made a motion, and if they are done, then I would ask that the mayor ask for a second and then a roll call vote.
And this is Kelly Clapper for the record. Yes, ma'am, we are officially done with our presentation.
Lisa Stywinter here. Just one quick second. Just want to thank everybody for their time and participation, and Kimley Horn for their presentation. We appreciate that. And just wanted to also mention, this was our step in kicking off that zoning map and providing public review on those ordinance sections that are 100% complete. We do have a website, the Transform Monroe, that we'll talk about getting that updated with this workshop information on there, and then possibly those ordinance sections that are already complete that can begin that public review process. So just wanted to mention that, and I can also send out an email to everyone once we get the website updated. But just wanted to point that out. And once again, thank y'all for your time. I appreciate it.
Mayor Pro Tem Holloway, we want to thank staff and of course the presenters for certainly a job well done, well prepared. Certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, Councilwoman, thank everybody for everything.
Mayor Kilgore, I'd like to thank everyone also for this afternoon. It's a good program and appreciate the planning board and meet with us also. And I do have a motion. Do I have a second?
Councilmember McGee, I'll second that.
I have a motion to second to adjourn. This time I'll call the roll. Councilmember Anthony,
Yes.
Councilman Gordon,
Yes.
Councilman Holloway, Mayor Pro
Yes.
Tem, Councilman James,
Yes.
Councilman Desire, Councilman McGee.
Yes.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will adjourn.
And this is Mary Ann on the planning board, the planning board chair. Do I have a motion for the planning board to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn. Richard?
I'll second the
Thank you.
motion.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Actually,
opposed?
Madam
Yes.
Chair, you have to have a roll call vote.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. All right. I say yes. Richard,
Yes.
your check. Edith Covington's not here. Rich Alley,
Here, yes, yes.
thank you. Renee Hardis,
Yes.
Jennifer Smith,
Yes.
Patrick Furr. Did we lose Patrick?
Patrick said yes.
Okay.
He's muted.
Margaret Desio,
He needs, I'm sorry, he needs to unmute to say yes. We regrettably cannot accept a nod of the head.
oh, there he is. Okay.
Okay, yes.
Okay, thank you. And Margaret Desio.
Yes.
Thank you.